Well, good morning. Thank you for your time today. We're always grateful to be able to connect with you all. My name is Bruce Anthony, and I'm one of the trainers with CERVIS Technologies. Before we get started, I wanted to point out that I have several colleagues on the call who will be able to answer your questions via the chat function. So please feel free to ask away throughout the webinar. They'll answer your questions directly, and they will also let me know of any questions they think would be helpful for the entire group. And I do also want to note that if they don't have time to answer your question immediately, or if you have to leave before you receive a response, our customer support team will reach out to you after the webinar. So the plan for today is to cover the newly added custom registration questions feature. So we'll talk about what custom registration questions are and how they differ from custom events. We'll also look at where to view, add, and manage custom registration questions. And then we'll talk about what searching and reporting options have come along with this feature. So first off, custom registration questions are a newly added feature to expand the information collected from volunteers when they are registering for specific opportunities. So custom registration questions can be applied to any opportunity type in service. So for example, let's say you have a long-term commitment service project that you want to accept applications towards. But this service project requires that volunteers provide additional information about themselves or maybe a reference. Well, these questions would allow you to require that information when volunteers are applying for this project, but not for your other events or projects in the system. Or say you have an upcoming potluck event where attendees are being asked to bring a type of dish and maybe provide more information about that. Or perhaps you have a special event where you'll be handing out t-shirts, but you don't normally want people to think they're getting a t-shirt, so you don't typically ask that question. Well, these types of questions can be asked as volunteers are registering for a specific normal event, time slot event, or service project by using custom registration questions. So you may already be familiar with the custom event opportunity type. Well, that's kind of superseded by the new custom registration questions. And custom events are eventually going to be deprecated actually this year on December 31st, 2021. Custom events will still exist if you have any existing ones, but you'll no longer be able to create new ones at that point. But like I mentioned, the new features of custom registration questions go above and beyond what that opportunity type offered, so what custom events offered anyway. And you'll see that today as we walk through setting up and using the new feature of custom registration questions. So the first thing that you need to do is, in order to utilize this new feature, is to create new custom registration questions. And that can be done in a couple different places, but we're going to start off by looking at the system configuration. So under System Management, if you go into Edit System Configuration, you'll see now under Information Collection, there's a second button here that's related to custom registration questions, and this is where you can manage those questions. So if we click into this menu, that takes you to this screen. Now, like I mentioned, you can get to this screen in other places, and I'll show you that. Primarily through your opportunities themselves. But this is where you create new custom registration questions. So you'll notice that we are not looking at a particular opportunity yet. These questions are kind of available for your whole database of opportunities. So you can create a question and then use that on multiple different opportunities as it's relevant. Let's walk through creating a new question. So the question type is how volunteers can respond to this question. What formatting is required? So a text, single line, or multi-line, that means volunteers can type in anything. There's just a character limit. And of course, multi-line has a higher character limit. Email, date, number, and phone would require that particular format. So volunteers would have to answer using that format. And then selection box allows you to generate drop-down menu type questions. The question requirement is either optional or required, exactly like the name implies. So when a volunteer is answering this question, is it going to be something that they can choose to give you or something that they must answer? The status is either active or archived. Obviously, for any new question you create, that's going to be active because you're using this currently. If you do have a question that you created, maybe just for one event, then you could archive that if you don't want to see that pop up in your other opportunities as an option. The question text is the actual question itself. So if we're asking people what their t-shirt size is, this is where I would type that in. The selection options are relevant only when you choose selection box as the question type, and this is where you create those options. So again, if we were doing t-shirt size, then this is where I would provide the different sizes that I want people to select between. So you just use a comma to separate those. You don't need to put spaces in between them. And then, of course, you can put in however many questions you need to there, or responses you need to. The required answer field is specific to selection boxes as well. If this is, for example, a yes or no question, like have you watched our training video? You could make a question like this, make it a yes or no question, and then you could require that volunteers say yes. And then this could actually serve as a requirement on the event itself. When a volunteer is registering or applying for this opportunity where you're using this question, then they would have to answer yes in order to actually be registered. Below that is the failure message option. So this again only applies if you're using a required answer. And again, that only applies for selection boxes there. The failure message has a default value, which you can see here in this information box, just a kind of standard. We apologize for the inconvenience, but the answer you provided does not meet our established criteria, right? So that's kind of standard language. You can see the full content of that down there. But if you want to provide specifics, like maybe in this case, you want to say, if you have not yet watched the training video, please go back to the lobby and watch the video now, right? You could have a specific failure message that's unique to this particular question. You don't have to do that. You could leave this blank. Now, once you've established how this question is created, you can go ahead and add that in. Adding in a question here does not add it into any existing events. So you have not yet done anything with this question. Volunteers won't see this question anywhere yet, and it's not going to be on anybody's profiles. In order to utilize this question, you need to select to use it on a specific opportunity. So that's done via the opportunity management side of the system. If we go into opportunity management, you can go into search and manage existing opportunities. You have to create an opportunity first in order to add these custom registration questions to it. So when you're creating a new opportunity, you will not see the option to add custom questions in. You must create the event or project first, and then you'll see those options appear. So if we go into search and manage existing opportunities, you can see now next to every event, there's a new button. So you'll see this right away. You may have already noticed it, but that has that question mark icon. You will also see this option appear in the main menu for an event with the same icon. It's just the second item in the list. You can manage custom registration questions. So both of those options will take you to this page, and there's 3 choices on this page. One is who is required to answer these questions. So this drop-down menu here allows you to select if only individual volunteers are answering the question, or if only groups are answering the question. This would be bulk group registration, so the group leader would do that on behalf of their group. Or you can ask it of both individual volunteers and groups. So you need to select that. That applies to any of the questions that you choose. So then we can choose which questions we want to be included. So I can select those through here. And then once we've chosen those questions, we can also pick what the order of those questions is. So if I want to shuffle these around, I can drag and drop these. So if I have a specific question that I want to be related to another, like for example, that potluck example I gave earlier, we have a name of dish question, and we also have this what type of dish are you bringing? Now these are sorted alphabetically initially. But I could make those right next to one another. So in this case, people choose what type of dish it is, and then below that, they enter in the name of the dish. And then once you've made those choices in terms of what questions are included, so which things are relevant to this event, and then also the order of those, and who is going to be answering them, then you can go ahead and save the questions assignments for this particular opportunity. So this menu exists for every single opportunity in your system. By default, none of the questions are selected, but you can go in and choose, of course, as many as you want to for each individual opportunity. So once you've enabled these questions on an opportunity, of course, then you'll start collecting information. So let's take a look real quick at the volunteer perspective, what it looks like to respond to those questions as a part of the registration process. I'm going to go ahead and log out, and we'll go to my event listing page. I have an event in here called Meals for Families. This is kind of like a potluck type event, but people are providing meals for families in need. And so they actually describe what they're bringing as a part of the registration questions. Those are the two examples that I shared earlier. So if we go ahead and click on this event, it's a time slot event, you'll see, and I can go and sign up for whichever shifts I want to. So let's say I'm available next Wednesday. I can click on sign up here. And just like the regular process for registering for a time slot event, you either log into your account or make a new one, but you can see now those custom registration questions are presented. So I have to answer what type of entree or what type of dish I'm bringing in this case. Let's say it's an entree and it's my uncle's spaghetti recipe, if I could spell that right. And then once I've answered this question, then I can select which particular time slots I want to register for. Now, I had selected one initially, so that's already pre-selected, but I could sign up for other shifts as well. So I could select additional options here. And I can even sign up for waitlisted shifts and still have those responses tied to that registration. Now, the responses that I just gave, so an entree of spaghetti, is going to be tied to every single shift that I select here. So once I complete this registration, then I've been added to the waitlist for one of those, but I've also been registered for several of them. And those questions are tied to those registrations. So from the volunteer's perspective, it's pretty seamless in terms of what they need to do. The system walks them through that. The questions are just presented as a part of the normal registration process. Now, we looked at a time slot event, but that's true for normal events as well as service projects. So let's go back to the admin view here. Now, when you as an admin are reviewing this information, there's two places where you can see it. The first and kind of most natural way to look for that would be through the opportunity itself. If you go into search and manage existing opportunities, when you click on one of these events that has that information in it, you can either go to manage the opportunity, or when you go to view the registered volunteers, you'll see on the right-hand side, the responses to that question are housed in notes with that same icon. So if I click on this question icon, I can view the response that someone provided as well as their answer. So we can see that information listed out here. If they provided that, of course, I made this an optional field, so people didn't have to provide the name, just select what type of dish it is. So that information, again, is going to be relayed next to every single registration, and you can, of course, review that manually through here. As an administrator, you can also make changes to that. So if someone called you back and they said, oh, no, I'm actually changing what I'm bringing, you could go and update those values and change that from the administrative perspective. Admin and leadership team members have the ability to make those edits, but the event organizers cannot edit those. They can still see them. So if someone has event leader or group leader access, they can still see these questions. And in fact, they would actually still have to provide them if they're signing someone up for the event. But they wouldn't necessarily, or they wouldn't be able to edit those responses as they lie. So this is one place to review that information. The other place is through a volunteer's profile directly. So if you go through the volunteer database side, or if I just click into view this volunteer's account here, we can view what they're registered for. So I can view what opportunities this person is signed up for. And if there are any events that had custom registration questions, then I would see that option, same icon, next to those registrations, and I can review the volunteers' responses. And again, as an administrator, I can edit those responses as well. All right, so the next thing to take a look at here is kind of searching and reporting on this information. So obviously, we've just taken a look at where you can review that data through the events themselves or through the volunteers. But if you want to export or report on that kind of information, then that's going to be done in kind of two primary ways. One, you can include this information on the sign-in sheet. So as you are updating an existing event, so if we go down to that meals event that we've been using as an example, if I go into update the event, under the additional organizer options section, you'll see the option to modify what is on the sign-in sheet. And at the bottom of this section, you can choose to include custom registration questions. So if you choose to do that, then of course that information will be relayed on the sign-in sheet. So if you print out the sign-in sheet through the event or do the combined event sign-in sheet, then you'll see that information being reported in that document. So that would just relay, of course, the volunteers' responses to those questions. It also includes the name of the question itself, so you get that context. So that's one place to review that information is through the sign-in sheets. Another place is via the advanced search and reporting. So there are searching options tied to these questions. If you go into the advanced volunteer search, and then down to participation options, so that's towards the bottom, volunteer participation options, you can search for people who are registered for a particular opportunity. So we could go and look for like that meal event or this reading mentors event that I have. And then you can also search for people below that who registered with the following custom registration question values. So I could select a particular custom registration question. And then there's several options in terms of what this data is looking for. So in this case, this highest level of education completed, this is a drop-down menu or a pick list field where volunteers can go and choose one of the responses, so that selection box value. And in here, I can search for something that is a specific value. So if I wanted to search for bachelor's, I could look for that specifically. Now, I know this is one of the options that's provided in this question, which is why I'm listing that here. So equals means it has to be this exactly, but I could also say like, which means it's looking for something like this or the kind of like a string of text. So if I couldn't remember if it was bachelor's or bachelor, then I could leave off the S and then search by that, or even just truncate it even further. You can also do things like starts with or ends with. So if you have several responses that start with a particular value or start with a particular word and you want to gather all of those at one time, you could do that. Or same thing with ends with. The greater than or less than options are for numbers and dates. But if we go ahead and run this search again, it's searching for people who are registered for this event, or for this, in this case, this is a project. And when they applied for this project, they said that their highest level of education completed was a bachelor's. So that's what I'm searching for in this case. So, of course, any search that you run through the advanced volunteer search, you can run reports on that information. So I could export this data using the spreadsheet function if I wanted to. But if I want to include those custom registration questions, what I'll need to do is under report management, under the volunteer management heading, I can select the first report type, custom participation report. Of course, I want to set my date range here. So let's say I want to go from the beginning of the year to now. And then in here, I can choose to use my previous volunteer search. So only those volunteers show up in the report. And then I can also choose in here to include specific data. So there's volunteer information, and then there's opportunity information. And the answers to custom registration questions is opportunity information because it is associated with every single registration. So if I run this report, then I would see those answers in this document as well. And those answers are provided in a single column called Answers to Custom Registration Questions. And each question has the text of the question, the response, and then a bar to separate it from the next question. All right, so today we covered an overview of the newly added custom registration questions. We talked about how to set up these questions and what capabilities they add to your opportunities. We looked at where to view volunteer responses and make changes as necessary. And we also took a look at the new reporting and searching options that correspond with this feature. So we're going to move into a time of Q&A. Our team has been answering questions throughout the call, but I'll be taking questions for the larger group as they come in. So please feel free to continue writing in your questions as you have them. So a question came in, when a volunteer applies for a project, where can you see those answers? That's a great question. So we were kind of primarily looking at events and just relating that information on the registrations themselves. But when a volunteer applies for a project, an open service project, or even for a pending event, so you can set up events to require applications as well, you can see that data when you're reviewing open applications. So there's a section for reviewing open service project applications on the main dashboard if you have any open applications or pending applications. But you'll also see the same option next to the relevant project when you're reviewing that information in managing your existing opportunities. But if you go into review open applications, you can see, of course, here all the open applications. And on the right-hand side, if there were any custom registration questions, you'll see that icon pop up here. And again, you can click on those to review the responses to those questions before you approve or reject that application. So again, the same thing applies for custom registration questions tied to events that require approval, because you can set up events to require approval before someone is actually registered. The same thing applies. There's a section for reviewing pending event registration requests. And if there are questions on that event, you'll see that icon here, and you can click to review that before you approve or disapprove someone's request. Okay, another question came in. Can volunteers edit their answers after the fact? It's a good question. Volunteers do not have permission to view or edit those responses after they've provided them. So that's something that you can see on the admin side, and you can review and make changes to as an admin or as a leadership team member. But volunteers cannot review or edit that information themselves. So another question, after an event ends, is the information still available in terms of reviewing that data for the attending volunteers and all that sort of information? So yeah, after the event takes place, that data is still housed there. That information is tied to the event itself. So you'll see that in the registrations, like we looked at earlier. Your events don't go away after they take place; they're just closed. And you can search for closed opportunities or search for something by name, and you would still see all those questions next to every registration. So that data would still be housed there. And it will also still be housed on the volunteer's profile. If you go to view their registrations and you're looking at past registrations, you'll see those questions there as well. So that information does not disappear after an event takes place, but it's tied to the registration itself. All right, very good. Looks like we've addressed all the questions that came in. Of course, if you do have further questions, please feel free to contact our support team. Let me just point that out again from the main dashboard. Whenever you're logged in as an administrator, at the bottom of the page, you can click on Need Help. This opens up a dialog where you can ask a question. So if you want to learn more about time slot events or anything else, you can search for that term through here, see what articles have to do with that. But regardless what you've searched for, you can always click on Contact Us at the bottom of the page to submit a support request to our customer support team. So please feel free to do this whenever you have questions. And especially if you have any questions about this feature or anything else that we've discussed or that you've encountered. But thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you joining. It's a pleasure to see you in the chat. I know I've met with a lot of you directly. We are grateful for the work that you do throughout all the different organizations and communities that you're serving and impacting. Partnering with you guys is one of the most satisfying aspects of our work. So again, if you have any questions, contact our support team. You can use that Need Help tool or just email support@servicetech.com. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great rest of your Thursday and an excellent week.